Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's meeting of the Platform Drafting Committee. And especially good morning to our friends on the West Coast who I know are joining us a little earlier than usual. I am Keisha Lance Bottoms, and I have the pleasure of serving as the 60th mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, the cradle of the civil rights movement. We are here today to consider the first draft of our party's platform. Thank you to everyone who is online watching the live stream and to the drafting committee members who are with us today. Before we go any further, please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the
republic
for which
it stands,
one
nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
Before we get into our agenda today, I would like to introduce the drafting committee members. This is a remarkable group served with each of you. I know that you have all put in an incredible amount of thought and work towards creating this platform. We have Dr. Tony Allen, the president of Delaware State University, one of our great HBCUs in this country. Stuart Applebaum is the president of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Congresswoman Catherine Clark represents the 5th Congressional District in Massachusetts. Senator Tammy Duckworth serves as the junior senator from the state of Illinois. Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia represents the 29th Congressional District in Texas. Dr. Heather Gottney is an associate professor at Fordham University. Don Graves is the former Domestic and Economic Policy Director in the Office of Vice President Biden. Congresswoman Deb Haaland represents the 1st Congressional District in New Mexico. Ana Lilia served as the political director on the Bernie 2020 campaign. I've been saying your name all week. What a lovely name it is, and I've got it right again. Yay for me. Josh Orton serves as a senior advisor to Senator Sanders. State Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez is a member of the Florida Senate representing the 37th District. Julianne Smith was the former Deputy National Security Advisor to Vice President Biden under the Obama administration. Richard Trumka is the president of the AFL-CIO, and Tom Vilsack is the former Secretary of Agriculture under President Obama. In addition, we are also joined by Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who serves as an ex officio member and was a member of the 2016 and 2012 drafting committee. Carmel Martin serves as senior advisor for policy on the Biden for President campaign and is the campaign's non-voting representative on our committee. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to the team who will be working with us throughout this process. Andrew Grossman is the platform director. He's also served as platform director in 2012 and 2016. Leah Moody is the deputy director and has over 2 decades of experience working with allied groups and elected officials. Patrice Taylor is the director of party affairs at the DNC and is responsible for all of the party business that happens at the convention. Christina Costa and Matan Chorev are the writers and will be working with each of you as they put together the proposed draft that we will review, and they put together the proposed draft that we are reviewing. Also joining us from the Biden campaign are Rosa Poe and Sarah Winchell. Quinn Tran and Tabitha Shustak round out the platform team. Quinn was also part of the platform team in 2016 and also in 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of today's meeting is to review the working draft of the platform you received on yesterday. As you all know, we held 3 incredible hearings where we heard from over 5 dozen people who have shared their stories and insights on how we can best solve the problems so many of our fellow Americans are facing. In addition, the platform team has engaged with numerous allied organizations, elected officials, and other groups to hear their ideas. We've also received hundreds of comments and videos and thousands of emails from Democrats who wanted to share their ideas with us. Through the insights and ideas shared in these hearings and online, I believe the draft that we have before us today reflects the vision of our party, which is to aspire to be a more perfect union. Today, we will discuss the proposed draft. We will go through section by section. I will open each section and then call on the writing team to give a quick summary of the top lines reflected in each section. I will then call on members who have requested to speak on that respective section. If you have any pressing thoughts or questions, please flag for Andy in the chat box and he will let me know and I will do my best to call on you. All right, if all hearts and minds are clear, let's get started. The first section of the platform is a land acknowledgement. Given that our convention is going to be held in Milwaukee, we wanted to make sure to incorporate this formal statement that recognizes and honors Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of the land. I would like to acknowledge Congresswoman Holland to read this section.
Thank you, Mayor Bottoms. Before I begin my remarks, I must first thank this platform drafting committee, its director, Andy Grossman, Biden senior advisor, Carmel Martin, and all the staff for furthering justice for our Democratic Party with the most inclusive platform in history and in honoring our Native nations. I look forward to continuing to work with all of you, and today and every day, I'm so proud to be a Democrat. The Democratic National Convention will take place on Indian land, and I thank all the ancestors for allowing me a voice in this space today as I share the Democratic National Convention land acknowledgement. The Democratic National Committee wishes to acknowledge that we gather together to state our values on lands that have been stewarded through many centuries by the ancestors and descendants of tribal nations who have been here since time immemorial. We honor the communities native to this continent and recognize that our country was built on Indigenous homelands. We pay our respects to the millions of Indigenous people throughout history who have protected our lands, waters, and animals. We respectfully acknowledge that we present this platform at our 2020 Democratic National Convention on the lands of the Bad River Band of the Lake Superior Tribe of Chippewa Indians, the Forest County Potawatomi Community, the Ho-Chunk Nation, the Lakota Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, the Lac du Flambe Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, the Menominee Nation, the Oneida Tribe of Indians of Wisconsin, the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, the San Croix Chippewa Indians of Wisconsin, the I always get this one wrong, Sakaugan Chippewa Community, and the Stockbridge Muncie Community Band of Mohican Indians. And I yield back, Mayor Bottoms.
Thank you. What a great way to start us off, Congresswoman. And I love your poster behind you and honored to join you today. Thank you for that. We will move on to the preamble, which highlights the core values that Democrats believe in and speaks to our greater diversity as a party. It lays out the vision for the future of our country that is ambitious and aspirational. With this platform, we are expressing that we are trying to articulate a vision that repairs the damage from the Trump administration and how we can build our country back in a way that reflects a more perfect union that we all strive towards. The preamble expresses the challenges before us, the worst public health crisis in a century, And as I sit here today, I am COVID positive. The worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, the worst period of global upheaval in a generation, the intolerable racial injustice that still stains the fabric of our nation will test America's character like never before. So we hope that we have captured the vision that repairs the damage and how we can build our country back in a way that reflects a more perfect union. Democrats will fight to repair the soul of this nation. The COVID-19 health crisis has impacted all of us in ways that will take years to realize. As you all know, this has hit home for my family and I, and so many in our communities across this country. This administration has completely bungled how they have handled the response, and it has cost lives. The American people deserve an urgent, robust, and professional response to the growing public health and economic crisis caused by the coronavirus outbreak. I will now turn it over to Carmel Martin, who will provide additional details.
Thank you, Mayor Bottom. Thank you so much for that, Mayor Bottoms. As you said, President Trump's failed response to the COVID-19 pandemic has led to unimaginable human and economic costs. His failures of leadership have cost tens of thousands of American lives, tens of millions of American jobs, and caused incalculable suffering and hardship across our country. In this platform, Democrats have outlined what it will take to beat this pandemic, recover from the devastation, heal our nation, and make sure that Americans are never again left vulnerable to a global pandemic. We commit to leadership that is responsible, compassionate, transparent, science-based, and honest. We outline 19 critical policy areas for immediately responding to the COVID-19 pandemic and President Trump's recession. Importantly, we call for articulating and implementing a coherent plan to protect our frontline heroes and ensure everyone in our country has access to testing, treatment, and vaccination. And we believe we must prioritize making our workers and families whole in this time of crisis and drive an economic response commensurate with the scale of the challenge before us that won't just build back our economy, but will build it back better than it was before the pandemic. We also strongly believe the United States must take responsibility for leading the global response to this pandemic, and as we successfully did in the Ebola pandemic. And we have seen too many times in the last 4 years when the President of the United States turns his back on the world, the American people suffer. I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'd now like to acknowledge Senator Duckworth, who will also comment on this section.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm calling in from the road where I'm taking my mom to Walter Reed, actually, to do some tests. So I want to chat a little bit about protecting Americans and recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. I welcome this section's strong emphasis on restoring American leadership at home and around the world, and to address the coronavirus pandemic and the economic consequences of President Trump's failures. It didn't have to be this way. Countries that responded with urgency, forces, and effectiveness by taking swift action, listening to experts, and communicating with the public, they bent the curve on new cases. They are not suffering through a resurgence the way that we are, and they are poised to have stronger economic recoveries than we are. We urgently have to change the course to protect Americans' lives and build our economy back better than it was before. And we can't leave anybody behind. We know that the disability community has faced significant risk during this deadly pandemic and yet received scant attention from the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress. That's why I'm pleased to see language concerning protecting the rights of people with disabilities in this pandemic and always. Democrats must be clear that we will ensure every federal agency aggressively enforces the integration mandate affirmed by the Olmstead decision and repair the damage done by the Trump administration. We will rigorously enforce non-discrimination protections for people with disabilities in healthcare, education, and housing, and ensure equal access to the ballot box. And we will advance disability rights globally. Also, the COVID-19 pandemic has hit small businesses especially hard. Democrats support making significant immediate grants and loans to help small businesses make payroll, pay rent, and other expenses, and keep their doors open when possible. Some estimates indicate as many as 40% of Black-owned small businesses may not survive President Trump's recession. This is outrageous. Democrats have to be clear that under a Biden administration, we will prioritize Black entrepreneurs and other entrepreneurs of color, as well as women entrepreneurs, before giving Tom Brady a $1 million forgivable loan. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and we wish your mother well today. Next, I'd like to acknowledge State Senator Rodriguez, who also has comments on this section.
Mayor Bottoms, thank you very much. I also agree that Democrats must act immediately to make more ambitious investments that will support and create jobs in response to President Trump's recession. We urgently need to support state and local governments, which are suffering severe budget shortfalls due to declines in tax revenue, while being asked to shoulder the burden of COVID-19 related services and rising unemployment. State and local budget cuts translate quickly into lost jobs in education, healthcare, and social services, all fields where we need to be adding jobs to meet the needs of the American people. Democrats will extend significant aid to state and local governments, school districts, and public and nonprofit colleges and universities, including HBCUs and minority serving institutions, to address these budget shortfalls and secure jobs. We will condition state and federal aid on maintaining and expanding public sector employment, including provisions to protect workers' rights. I'm also pleased to see language about investing to modernize states' unemployment insurance systems and support strong federal oversight to make sure that people who have lost their jobs can get their benefits in a timely and accessible way. It's unconscionable that workers had to struggle to access their unemployment benefits in the midst of this pandemic in states across the country. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we move on to the next section, I'd like to ask the committee to consider a number of amendments to the sections that we will be discussing next. As members know, the writers have worked diligently with all of us to make sure that the draft before us reflects our priorities as well as the input we received online, what we learned during the hearings, and the feedback that has been given during the engagement. I will call on a member to offer their amendment. After the amendment is offered, we will have additional speakers. If other members would like to be recognized, please let Andy know in the chat box, and we will do our best to call on you while being mindful of our time. After discussion, we will move on to a vote. The chair will now recognize Senator Vilsack to make a motion to offer amended language.
Mayor, thank you very, very much. And thank you for your leadership of this committee. It certainly has been a pleasure working with you and with members of this committee, and appreciate the opportunity to propose an amendment that is focused on the issue of clemency. The reality is the Democratic Party does believe in justice, and part of justice is understanding that there are times when those deserve a act of clemency because they have turned their life around, they have made amends, they are committed to living a good, prosperous life. But unfortunately, what we've seen in this administration is a misuse of the use of clemency to benefit political cronies and friends. And this is an unfortunate circumstance. It's a stain on this administration. And I propose that we, as Democrats, contain in our platform a provision that says that we denounce President Trump in his inappropriate use of clemency to help his friends and political cronies avoid justice. I think this provides a clear contrast between the ideals of the Democratic Party and all those of America with the way in which this administration has utilized and misused the clemency power the president has.
Thank you. Please unmute yourself if you would like to offer a second to this amendment.
Second.
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 I'm sorry. Thank you. The motion has been moved and properly seconded. We will now move to discussion on the motion. I will call on Secretary Vilsack again to begin that discussion.
Well, Mayor, I think in introducing the amendment, I've clearly stated this is an opportunity for us to provide a sharp, clear, and understandable contrast given the recent pardoning of Mr. Stone, or the clemency grant of Mr. Stone by President Trump. This is clearly an act designed and directed at a political crony and friend. It reflects an era of corruption in this administration. It should not be tolerated. And I think we as Democrats should make a clear stand that this is not how the clemency power should be utilized now or in the future. And as Democrats, we are committed to using it for the proper and appropriate purposes. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. I will now recognize Mr. Orton.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree the power of clemency that rests in the executive power can be used for good. President Obama showed us how, using the power of his office to give over 1,000 men and women a second chance, especially those imprisoned inhumanely for minor drug crimes. Unfortunately, Donald Trump has shown how this power can be used as a tool of self-dealing corruption. His use of this power has been outrageous, historically damaging, and an abuse of our values as Democrats. So I strongly support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Orton. We have now concluded our discussion on this motion and will now move to a vote. All in favor of the motion for the amendment condemning Trump's use of clemency, please unmute yourself and say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? All right, none being opposed, that motion is adopted. And this section will be amended to reflect these changes. The chair will now recognize State Senator Rodriguez to make a motion to offer additional amended language related to disaster preparedness.
Chair Bottoms, thank you very much. This is language in the climate crisis section. The amendment being offered is the following language, which I'll read, quote, "We will prioritize disaster preparedness for disproportionately exposed, frontline, and vulnerable communities, and those who struggle most to cope, including seniors, low-income families, and people with disabilities, to become more physically and economically resilient to extreme weather events, heat stress, and increases in disease that scientists have connected to climate change," unquote. I'll briefly explain the intent. Extreme weather emergencies are on the rise, and they're unfortunately becoming the new normal. Hurricanes, floods, wildfires hit all of our communities hard, but are particularly devastating to the most vulnerable, including low-income communities, people with disabilities, and people of color. That is exactly what Puerto Rico saw during Hurricane Maria, for example. People with disabilities and the elderly, the medically fragile, were hit the hardest by Trump's failed response to Hurricane Maria. The stories from Puerto Rico during the hurricane are horrific, and they are unacceptable. As Democrats, we will do more and we will do better. Even as we tackle the causes of climate change with many policy proposals here in our platform, we also prepare to protect Americans. We also prepare and protect Americans from the effects of climate. To me, that means building resiliency and investing in disaster preparedness with an emphasis on disproportionately exposed frontline and vulnerable communities that are in danger of suffering the most. These resources are long overdue and fiscally responsible. For every dollar invested on the front end in disaster mitigation, It's estimated that governments and communities save $6 on the back end. As climate-related extreme weather events become more common, our country will continue to experience one emergency after another. The question that we are posing here at this platform committee is, are we going to leave people behind, or are we going to protect Americans in need? And as Democrats, unlike Republicans, we rise to this challenge. I believe it's time to embrace our shared humanity as we combat the climate crisis together. I strongly urge this committee to support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, State Senator Rodriguez. Is there a second to this amendment?
Second.
Second. Thank you. This motion has been moved and properly seconded. We will now move on to discussion. State Senator Rodriguez, is there additional discussion you would like to have on this amendment?
None from me. I'm eager to hear if there are any other members of the committee.
Thank you. I will now call on Congresswoman Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again for your leadership. And I hope all is going well with your COVID status and that you have a full recovery. So thank you for being here, and God bless. I just wanted to add a few words in seconding this amendment and urging adoption. Climate change is not a hoax. It's very real. And for many of us in the Gulf Coast area that are hit hardest by so many storms. I know here in Houston, we've had so many 500-year floods and rains now that I've lost count. But one thing that's always reoccurring, I always like to say, is that poor people were poor before the storm. They're just going to be poor afterwards. I think the same can be said for seniors, for the physically disabled, the people who don't have a chance to get out and take care during a storm. It always seems, Senator, that you're right, that some people do end up feeling left behind. And then when it comes to the dollars for relief funds, they again feel left behind because they don't feel there's no equity. So this amendment clearly demonstrates that this party recognizes that and that we want to make sure that everybody does get taken care of and that no one will be left behind. It prioritizes this in our statement. And I think for all those horrific stories that we hear, those people that have been the greatest impacted will feel like they're being listened to, and that this platform is not a platform for just those at the top, but those at the bottom, which is something that the president, Vice President Biden, always talks about. So I think this is a very important amendment. It again shows the priorities of this party and the priorities of Vice President Biden. So I urge adoption.
Thank you. We've now concluded our discussion on this motion and will now move to a vote. All of those in favor of the motion to amend with language related to disaster preparedness, please unmute your microphones and respond with aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? None being opposed, that motion is adopted, and the section will be amended to reflect these changes. The chair now recognizes Josh Orton to discuss an important issue in the foreign policy section.
Make sure I'm not muted here. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I speak today as a proud Jewish American who strongly supports the Jewish state of Israel and its right to security, who has prayed at the Western Wall, but who is also deeply concerned about the current direction of the government of Israel, the rights of the Palestinian people, and the United States' responsibility to consistently apply its own values of human and civil rights. And I want to thank the committee and the Vice President for their work here. Let us be as clear as we can be. Donald Trump has been the worst president for human rights in modern history, and that includes the rights of the Palestinian people, and the worst president in modern history for the long-term prospects of Israel as a Jewish state. President Obama may have said it best, giving a speech in Cairo in 2009. Quote, Palestinians endure the daily humiliations, large and small, that come with occupation. So let there be no doubt the situation for the Palestinian people is intolerable. The bottom line is that the Palestinians live under an occupation and it's no longer a matter of serious dispute. It's important to acknowledge this because people living under occupation are afforded certain rights and those rights must be upheld. A right wing in Israel and fortunately some supporters in the US have long sought to erase that. We shouldn't help them. And a growing and just movement within our party believes that US aid should not be used to facilitate annexation and violate Palestinians' rights. Ending the occupation is an issue of racial justice. At a time when hundreds of thousands of Americans have been marching in our streets for equality and civil rights, it is absolutely necessary for the Democratic Party to speak truthfully to the Palestinian efforts to secure those same rights. Democrats support a negotiated two-state solution, and I'm pleased that the platform supports the Palestinian right to a state of their own. Mayor, I'm proud of the progress this committee has made and truly believe this platform lays out the most progressive vision of America in all of our lifetimes. I very much look forward to working with the platform committee as at the next stage to continue this important conversation on foreign policy and the discussion to recognize the rights of all people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Orton. And I will now call on Julie Smith for remarks.
Thank you, Mayor Bottoms, and thank you, Josh, for those remarks. I'm very pleased today to see the committee speaking with one voice. That's absolutely critically important on not only this issue, but on all issues. Very pleased to see the unity on our support for Israel's security, but also for our support for the right of the Palestinians to live in freedom and security in a viable state of their own. I think that the platform language truly reflects the views of our party, and I think it's perfectly in line with Vice President Biden's own convictions. I also think that our commitment to Israel's security, its right to defend itself, and to our alliance is and ought to remain absolutely ironclad. But so too should our commitment to help bring this conflict, which has caused so much pain to so many, to an end. I'm proud of this platform, proud to be a part of this drafting committee that supports a section on foreign policy that puts emphasis on a renewal of American diplomacy as well as principled American leadership. That's what we need more than ever, not just in the Middle East, but truly all around the world. I know everyone on this committee is united behind that idea, and I look forward to working with all of you to help realize it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. We've concluded our discussion on this important issue, and now we'll move forward as I've recognized Analilia Mejia to make a motion to offer amended language related to universal health care.
Thank you, Mayor Bottoms. In our nation, upwards of 30 million Americans do not have health insurance, and even more are underinsured. Even those with insurance, costs are so high that medical bills are the #1 cause of bankruptcy in the United States. Democrats are united in the belief that we should be spending money on doctors, nurses, mental health specialists, dentists, and other professionals who provide services to people and improve their lives. We must invest in the development of new drugs and technologies that cure disease and alleviate pain, as well as fighting the inequities that cost lives, in particular of Black Americans, immigrants, and the working poor, not wasting hundreds of billions of dollars a year on profiteering, huge executive compensation packages, and outrageous administrative costs. Within our party, many believe that creating a Medicare for all, single-payer national health insurance program is the optimal way to provide everyone in America with comprehensive healthcare coverage, free at the point of service. As such, I offer the following amendment. Generations of Democrats have been united in the fight for universal healthcare, from advocates who want to build on and strengthen the Affordable Care Act to supporters of a Medicare for all approach. All are critical to ensuring that healthcare is a human right. I am proud to see that this platform includes our party's commitment to lowering costs, to expanding support to states, to expanding Medicare in order to cover hearing, vision, and dental. And I ask that we also include a recognition of a perspective from a significant number of voters and people within our party. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
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 Thank you. This motion has been moved and properly seconded. We will now move to discussion. Is there further discussion, Anna Lilia?
Thank you, Mayor. The only thing I'll add is that the current pandemic and healthcare crisis has really laid bare the inequities in our healthcare system. It is impacting communities disparately. It is impacting the working poor and the uninsured and underinsured, and the consequences will be long-term. And I am proud to be part of a party that continues to strive to healthcare is a human right. And I would love for us to recognize perspectives across our party as we join together to ensure that people have access to quality, access affordable, and actually have.
Great, thank you, Ms. Mejia. Now we will go on to Don Graves to offer additional remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Analia, for the important points that you made. The current platform language, as well as Vice President Biden's policies, are the most progressive in Democratic Party history and focus on achieving universal coverage. The Unity Task Force, uniting representatives of Vice President Biden's and Senator Sanders' campaigns, agreed on the language we're discussing today. For the first time, the platform delinks employment and health insurance by giving all Americans the choice to select high-quality, affordable public option through the marketplace. This is especially important during public health emergencies like COVID-19. This public option has key differences to private marketplace plans. It will have at least one plan choice with no deductibles. It will cover all primary care without out-of-pocket costs, and it will control costs by negotiating prices in the same way Medicare does. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We've now concluded our discussion on this motion and will now move on to a vote. All of those in favor of the motion on universal health care, please unmute your microphone and respond with aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? There being none opposed, this motion has been adopted and the section will be amended to reflect these changes. The chair will now recognize President Applebaum to make a motion to offer amended language related to financial advisors' fiduciary duty.
Mayor Bottoms, thank you. And thank you for your leadership of this committee and of one of the best cities in this country and in this world. As Democrats, we have to do more when it comes to enhancing the retirement security of Americans. In 2016, the Obama-Biden administration took a key step forward and passed a rule that protected workers saving for their retirements, requiring the financial advisors that people consulted to put the people's interest first. This policy was absolutely critical. It ensured that seniors, families, and workers could trust their financial advisors. It gave people the confidence of a dignified retirement. And most of all, it was going to protect their hard-earned retirement savings. Unfortunately, the Trump administration, when they took office, immediately delayed and tried to scrap the rule. It then rewrote the regulations to allow financial advisors to put their own self-interests over the interests of their clients. That is just plain wrong. That's why today I'm proposing an amendment that reads, Democrats believe that when workers are saving for retirement, the financial advisors they consult should be legally obligated to put their clients' best interests first. We will take immediate action to reverse the Trump administration's regulations, allowing financial advisors to prioritize their self-interest over their clients' financial well-being. Rescinding the rule resulted in the loss of billions in retirement savings from the pockets of hardworking Americans. And it put the money straight into the hands of financial institutions. The Obama-Biden administration found that these conflicts of interest were costing hardworking Americans more than $17 billion every year. Estimates suggest that receiving this bad counsel can result in the loss of more than a quarter of a retiree's savings. And the atmosphere of uncertainty and distrust keeps many hardworking Americans who need sound financial advice out of the market entirely. As Democrats, I know we're going to fight against these efforts. It's a disgrace that the Trump administration has enabled special interests, allowing them to prey on Americans' retirement savings. I strongly urge the drafting committee to adopt this amendment to the 2020 Democratic platform. Thank you.
Thank you, President Applebaum. Is there a second to
Second.
this? Thank you. The motion has been moved and properly seconded. We will now move on to discussion. President Applebaum, do you have further discussion on this motion?
No, other than this is just yet another example of how this administration is wrong for working people. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now call on Dr. Gottney for additional remarks.
Thank you, Mayor. To me, this is a clear-cut question of whose interests we choose to protect. Do we protect the interest of Wall Street, or do we protect the interest of Main Street? In very clear contrast to the Trump administration, which has frankly paid a lot of lip service to supporting workers, this amendment says to working people loud and clear that Democrats will stand up, will protect your hard-earned savings, and that we have your back. So that is why I wholeheartedly support this amendment.
Thank you, Dr. Gottney. And now I will recognize Senator Duckworth for additional remarks.
Thank you, Mayor. The Trump administration's elimination of the Obama-Biden administration's fiduciary rule is a perfect example of how this administration has betrayed regular American workers and retirees. Trump betrayed millions of Americans, people like Russell and Christine Kazda, a retired mechanic and a fourth grade teacher in Illinois. Mr. Kazda suffered an injury and was forced to retire early after a 30-year career. My constituents thought they had been doing the right thing for years in saving for retirement. So why are the Russell and Christine Kazda families struggling today? Why did their life savings fall below $125,000? Because they falsely presumed that the people they were paying to advise them had their best interests at heart. When urged into transferring $172,000 of their retirement savings into a risky investment products that were falsely portrayed as low risk, they had no clue that the people advising were focused on pocketing 10% commissions, not guaranteeing retirement security for Russell and Christine. My constituents tried to play by the rules, but they had no clue that financial professionals advising them were not obligated to act in their best interest. The Obama-Biden administration took action to end such predatory practices and hold the financial industry accountable for acting in the best interest of workers. They put American workers first. So what did Trump do once he got into power? He tore up that rule. The Democratic Party must speak loudly and clearly that we will protect Americans who just want to retire securely. By strongly endorsing the immediate restoration of a strong fiduciary rule, this amendment does just that. And I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. We've concluded our discussion on this motion and will now move to a vote. All in favor of the motion to add language related to financial advisors' fiduciary duty, please unmute your microphone and say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? There being none opposed, this motion has been adopted and the section will be amended to reflect these changes. The next section that we will discuss is building a stronger, fairer economy. When President Obama and Vice President Biden took office, they had to stop an economic recession, and we are again trying to stop the Trump administration from rigging the economy for the wealthy and leaving behind the middle class. Democrats will implement policies that will create millions of jobs and promote prosperity for all. While addressing wealth and income inequality, Democrats believe in guaranteeing the right to form and join unions, raising wages, ensuring equal pay for women and paid leave, and securing a dignified retirement. I will now recognize Carmel Martin, who will provide additional details for this section.
Thank you, Mayor Bottoms. President Trump inherited the longest economic expansion in history from the Obama-Biden administration, and he squandered it. In this platform, we lay out a plan to stop another Republican recession from becoming a second Great Depression by investing in infrastructure, care work, clean energy, and small businesses to put Americans to work in good-paying jobs, shoring up state and local budgets to save jobs and protect public health in the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and enacting fundamental reforms to address structural and systemic racism and entrenched income and wealth inequality in our economy. But we won't stop there. We commit to also forge a new social and economic contract with the American people, a contract that invests in the people and promotes shared prosperity, not one that benefits only big corporations and the wealthiest few. A new social and economic contract that affirms housing is a right and not a privilege. A new social and economic contract that raises wages and restores workers' rights to organize, join a union, and collectively bargain. That at last supports working families and the middle class by securing equal pay for women and paid leave for all. That provides access for all to reliable and affordable banking and financial services. A new social and economic compact that at last grapples honestly with America's long and ongoing history of racism and disenfranchisement, and invests instead in building equity and mobility for the people of color who have been left out and left behind for generations. And I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Carmel. I'd like to acknowledge President Trumka, who also has comments on this section.
Thank you, Mayor Bottoms. This platform is about demanding transformative structural change that directly addresses inequality of income, inequality of opportunity, and inequality of power. As the platform says, we do not simply aspire to return our country to where we were 4 years ago. We know we must be bolder and more ambitious. Right now, America is facing several different crises at the same time. And the only way that we can tackle them successfully is by making sure that workers have voice and power. We know that strong American labor unions help increase wages and living standards for workers across the economy, which is why Democrats will prioritize passing the PRO Act and restoring workers' rights. And Democrats will also help ensure the global economy works for workers. We'll insist on enforceable labor standards in trade agreements, address the root causes of our trade deficit, reverse President Trump's tax breaks that incentivize companies to ship jobs overseas, and reinvest in American manufacturing. Democrats are unequivocal about protecting and strengthening Social Security and increasing benefits. And we will ensure that Social Security will be there forever for the American people. I also welcome the strong commitment in this platform to protecting the pension benefits workers have earned, including when companies are going through bankruptcies. When this platform is implemented, it will result in a stronger, fair economy for every American out there. And I strongly endorse this section.
Thank you, President Trumka. I will now recognize President Applebaum, who also has comments on this section.
Thank you. Economic justice and racial justice are intertwined. We cannot hope to raise wages without taking on the profound racial biases at work in our employment system. The wage gap between Black workers and white workers is higher today than it was 20 years ago. It typically takes a Black woman 19 months to earn what a white man typically earns in 12 months. And for Latinas and Native American women, it takes typically almost 2 years. Democrats believe we need to be much more proactive and aggressive in rooting out discrimination in our employment system. Federal contractors should be required to develop and disclose plans to recruit and promote people of color, women, people with disabilities, and veterans, and be held accountable for delivering. We will enforce labor and environmental protections for farm workers, including overtime and safety rules protecting workers from exposure to pesticides and extreme heat. We will raise wages and improve benefits for care workers, including child care workers, home health workers, early childhood educators, and other workers who have always been essential to our economy. Democrats believe we need to level the playing field for working families. We will make sure the wealthy and big corporations pay their fair share in taxes. We will curb Wall Street abuses and make sure no bank is ever again too big to fail. We will tackle corporate concentration and protect consumer rights, including data and privacy rights. And I am pleased that this platform contains very strong language about ending poverty, raising wages, making it easier for working families to access benefits and targeted tax breaks, and helping families meet basic needs for housing, nutrition, healthcare, and fair banking services that far too many people in our country cannot access today. Thank you.
Thank you, President Applebaum. Next, I will acknowledge Mr. Graves, who also has comments on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Democrats believe the COVID-19 pandemic and President Trump's recession demand unprecedented transformational federal investments to create family-sustaining and union jobs. We will support investments that will create and sustain millions of jobs in infrastructure, manufacturing, small business, care work, agriculture, and science and technology. We believe that the world's richest nation should have the world's best infrastructure system. We will repair, modernize, and expand our highways, roads, bridges, airports, ports, lock and dam systems, freight infrastructure, passenger rail, transit systems, water infrastructure, and broadband. We believe more products should be stamped made in America and actually made in America, and will expand support for American manufacturing. We will boost funding for small business grant and lending programs especially those that support women and minority-owned small businesses, and expand access to credit for unbanked and underbanked businesses. We will put homeownership in reach for millions of working families, greatly increase the supply of affordable housing through new construction, and make energy saving upgrades and energy efficiency retrofits that will save families money and create good jobs. We will take on decades of discrimination in the housing system by equalizing access to credit, making it easier for first-time homebuyers, many of whom are families of color, to get a fair mortgage, and giving local governments tools to combat gentrification and help longtime residents stay in their homes and neighborhoods. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. And now we will discuss the section of the platform where we cover healthcare. For a century, Democrats have fought to secure universal healthcare. While we are all being impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, President Trump and the Republican Party are trying to tear healthcare away from millions of people who depend on it for survival. Democrats will continue to fight to ensure that all Americans can access quality healthcare and affordable prescription drugs. We must guarantee healthcare not as a privilege for some, but as a right for every person. I will now recognize Carmel Martin, who will provide additional details on this important section.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As you said, and as Ana Lilia's amendment affirmed, Democrats have fought to achieve universal health care for a century, and we will keep up the fight until all Americans can access secure, affordable, high-quality health insurance. As Democrats, we fundamentally believe healthcare is a right for all, not a privilege for the few. We are going to, at last, build the healthcare system the American people have always deserved, one that finally provides universal healthcare coverage, reduces prescription drug prices, premiums, and out-of-pocket costs, reins in overall healthcare expenses, and tackles the deep-seated inequities in our health system. We will build a healthcare system that is driven by the needs of patients and the people who care for them, including care workers, instead of the profit motives of corporations. And I thank the drafting committee's help in crafting an extremely strong platform on this topic.
Thank you, Carmel. I'd now like to recognize Secretary Vilsack with comments on this section.
Thanks very much, Mayor. I don't think there's a greater opportunity to provide contrast between the Democratic Party and its approach to healthcare and the Republican approach. For the last number of years, we've watched the Trump administration attempt to dismantle the Affordable Care Act and the protections that were provided under that act. So that's why I'm pleased to see that we, as Democrats, are building on bedrock healthcare laws, including the Affordable Care Act, to at last achieve universal healthcare coverage and care. The center part of this plan, of course, is the high quality, affordable public option. And it's important to note that this public option will provide at least one plan choice to all Americans without deductibles, will be administered by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, not private companies, and will cover all primary care without any copays and control costs for any other treatments by negotiating prices with doctors and hospitals, just like Medicare does on behalf of older Americans. I'm glad to see that this platform recognizes that it's not enough to have a commitment to eliminating healthcare disparities. We must have a comprehensive plan. And we as Democrats will in fact launch a sustained government-wide effort with leadership at the highest levels to eliminate racial, ethnic, gender, and geographic gaps in insurance rates and access to quality care and health outcomes. This includes tackling the social, economic, and environmental inequities, the social determinants of health like poor housing, hunger, inadequate transportation, mass incarceration, air and water pollution, and gun violence. All of these contribute to worse health outcomes for low-income Americans and people of color. I'm pleased to see that we're also providing for a strong commitment in this section to support community health clinics and rural health centers. I think incredibly important to send a message to rural Americans that they will not be left out of this effort to expand access to healthcare, making it easier for all Americans, regardless of where they live, no matter how much money they make, to access healthcare, mental health services, and substance abuse disorder treatment. This is a platform that also, in addition to expanding access to mental health and substance abuse treatment, expands long-term care services and support, critically important, especially in rural places. It protects Native American access to health, secures reproductive health rights and justice for women, provides expansive opportunities protecting maternal health, LGBTQ plus healthcare access, and also, I think really importantly, addresses the need to focus on the workforce that provides us the care in our hospitals, in our clinics, with our doctors throughout the healthcare system. And finally, recognizing the important role of research and development in finding cures for illnesses and diseases that currently affect so many Americans. So I'm pleased to see this platform make a strong commitment on healthcare.
Thank you, Secretary Vilsack. Next, I'd like to acknowledge Analilia Mejia, who also has comments on this section.
Thank you again, Mayor. I first want to say that I was very proud to have, along with Carmel Martin, have had a role in watching the efforts of the Unity Task Force, in particular, the members who toiled on issues around healthcare. They worked really diligently to identify opportunities in which our party can move forward as it relates to healthcare and making it affordable, accessible, and a right to all. This section, I'm particularly glad to see that it includes language on restoring federal funding to Planned Parenthood, which, as we all know, provides vital preventive and reproductive health care for millions of women, especially low-income women, working class women, women of color, and LGBTQ plus people. I am glad to see that Democrats oppose and will fight to overturn federal and state laws that create barriers to women's reproductive health and rights. And we will repeal the Hyde Amendment and protect and codify Roe versus Wade. I appreciate the inclusion of pregnancy complications associated, particularly that impact Black women, as Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy complications. That is unfair, unjust, and obviously a severe healthcare and racial justice issue. I think as Democrats, I'm glad to see that we're committed to saving mothers' lives, and Democrats are going to expand postpartum Medicaid coverage to a full year after giving birth, invest in rural maternal health, promote a diverse perinatal workforce, and implement implicit bias training for health professionals. As we know, those disparities on how, in particular, Black Americans are treated result in an impact of quality of care. This platform makes it very clear its support for comprehensive solutions to address every dimension of the Black maternal health crisis in America, and supports policies and approaches that will at least have cut in half our nation's unacceptably high maternal mortality rates. I also want to highlight the strong language in this platform around expanding access to long-term services and supports, and ending the institutional bias in Medicaid, and considerably increasing the size of the home healthcare workforce to help many more elderly Americans and people with disabilities stay in their homes and communities. As a member of the sandwich generation, caring for both children and an elderly parents, I especially appreciate the recognition of that and efforts in that. I also welcome the extremely strong language in this platform around raising pay and benefits for our home health care workers, a majority of whom are women of color and who are absolutely critical to our economy. Again, as someone that's impacted by that, and obviously all of us will, if we're lucky, will reach our golden years. This is especially important. So thank you. I yield.
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize Congresswoman Clark and Congresswoman Lee, who were both in committee meetings and are now able to join us. So thank you for joining us this morning. The next section we will discuss highlights our beliefs around protecting communities and reforming our criminal justice system. In the most recent weeks and months, many in our nation have been exposed to the issues that so many communities of color have faced regarding their interactions with our criminal justice system. All evidence shows that our criminal justice system is failing, and we have to refocus our efforts to overhaul the system from top to bottom. I will now turn it over to Carmel Martin, who will provide additional details on this section.
Thank you, Mayor Bottoms. This is another section of the that benefited from weeks, months of deliberations by our Criminal Justice Unity Task Force. So I want to thank them for their great work on this, as well as all of the drafting committee members and the terrific witnesses that we had speak at the hearings about these issues. The platform outlines our plan to end the era of mass incarceration and dramatically reduce the number of Americans held in jails and prisons while continuing to reduce crime rates. We will break the school to prison pipeline that sees children of color arrested in their classrooms for misbehavior that ought to be handled in the principal's office and build a school to opportunity pipeline instead. We will ensure real accountability for individual and systemic misconduct in our police departments. We believe substance use disorders are diseases, not crimes, and we believe poverty is not a crime either and should not be treated as one. The platform deepens our commitment to helping those who have served their time, can re-enter society, earn a good living, and participate in our democracy as the full citizens they are. And I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize Dr. Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and blessings and prayers to you and your family. I also want to thank the committee for this wonderful experience. We are quite proud to be able to represent this particular interest. And I want to quote from the platform document itself before I provide my comments. America is the land of the free, and yet more of our people are behind bars per capita than anywhere else in the world. Instead of making evidence-based investments in education, jobs, healthcare, and housing that are proving to keep communities safe and prevent crime from occurring in the first place, our system has criminalized poverty, over-policed and underserved Black and Brown communities, and cut public services. Instead of offering the incarcerated the opportunity to turn their lives around, our prisons are overcrowded and continue to rely on inhumane methods of punishment. Instead of treating those who have served their time as full citizens upon their return to society, too many of our laws continue to punish the formerly incarcerated, erecting barriers to housing, employment, and voting rights for millions of Americans. Democrats believe we need to overhaul the criminal justice system from top to bottom. Police brutality is a stain on the soul of our nation. It is unacceptable that millions of people in our country have good reason to fear that they may lose their lives in a routine traffic stop, or while standing on a street corner, or while playing with a toy in a public park. It's unacceptable that Black parents must have the talk to try to protect their children from the very police officers who are supposed to be sworn to protect and serve. It's unacceptable that more than 1,000 people, a quarter of them Black, are killed by police every year. Democrats also recognize that all too often, systematic cuts to public services have left police officers on the front lines of responding to social challenges for which they have not been trained, from homelessness to mental health crises to the opioid epidemic. We can and must do better for our communities. Madam Chair, I believe this is representative of who we are as a Democratic Party and the types of things that we need to fight for. This year's platform lays out an ambitious, progressive, evidence-based, results-oriented approach to reforming our criminal justice system. Democrats know we can end the era of mass incarceration and dramatically reduce the number of Americans held in jails and prisons while continuing to reduce crime rates, which have fallen steadily from their peak nearly 3 decades ago. We will break the school to prison pipeline and build a school to opportunity pipeline. We'll stop punishing children and teenagers like they're adults and invest in alternatives to incarceration for young people. We'll ensure real accountability for individual and systemic misconduct in our police departments, establish strict national standards governing the use of force, and reinvigorate community policing approaches. And we will at last reform sentencing disparities that have disproportionately punished Black and Brown Americans for far too long. We will fight to repeal federal mandatory minimums in the sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine and abolish the death penalty. I believe these are the right approaches, and we must stand boldly and make sure that they get to the finish line. Madam Chair, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. I'd now like to acknowledge Ana Lilia Mejia, who has comments on this section.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to echo Dr. Allen. I am, again, very proud of what is contained in this particular section of the Democratic Party platform, and I believe share the thought, as many of you I'm sure do, that our criminal justice system should be based on the justice you deserve and not the justice one can afford. I'm glad that in this section we are discussing poverty and making it clear that poverty should not be a crime. In our nation, I'm glad to see that in this platform, rather, Democrats are supporting eliminating the use of cash bail and believe that no one should be imprisoned for the failure to pay a fine or a fee. Equal justice under the law should not be contingent on the ability to pay for quality legal representation, which makes the inclusion of increasing funding for public defenders of utmost importance. We also, in this platform, we speak of redemption. Democrats believe that we must deepen our commitment to helping those who have served their time and re-enter and facilitate their re-entry into society. We will pursue a holistic approach to rehabilitation, including increasing support for programs that provide educational opportunities to people in prison and returning citizens. We support federal and state efforts to ban the box, and we're going to stand united to fight to overturn legal barriers to housing, healthcare, mental health, and substance use disorder treatments. And of course, fight to ensure access to the ballot box. It is unfair and unjust that we, in this nation, that people are essentially punished in perpetuity and not allowed to re-enter the society that we wish them to participate in a proactive and positive way. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you. The next section, Healing the Soul of America, highlights some of the core beliefs of the Democratic Party. We believe that our country is best when our differences are respected and when politicians advance policies that reflect our shared values. The current administration has the opposite approach and will do everything they can to divide us. I will now turn it over to Carmel Martin, who will provide additional details on this section.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. President Trump has denigrated virtually every segment of American society, and in so doing, he has insulted the very idea of America itself. Healing the soul of America means facing up to the deepest inequities in our society, from structural racism to misogyny to discrimination against people with disabilities, and enacting ambitious measures to fix them. This section makes clear the core values that unite this party, detailing specific measures we will take to protect American civil rights, to achieve racial justice and equity, to protect the rights of women, LGBTQ+ people, and people with disabilities, and to honor Indigenous tribal nations. We layer plans to end violence against women and the epidemic of gun violence, support faith and service, and protect freedom of the press. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Carmel. I'd like to recognize Congresswoman Holland.
Thank you, Mayor Bottoms. I'm proud that this year's platform contains by far the most comprehensive and progressive language regarding the Democratic Party's commitment to honoring Indian tribes and Indigenous peoples and upholding the federal government's trust obligations. This platform commits to working on a nation-to-nation basis with Indian tribes to provide full funding to fulfill unmet trust and treaty obligations and improve the predictability of funding for tribes. It contains strong language about investing in jobs, housing, veteran support, education, healthcare, clean energy, clean water, small businesses, and criminal justice in Indian country, and for Native Americans, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians, no matter where they live. This platform is committed to ending the epidemic of violence against Native American women, fighting for justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and at last reauthorizing and strengthening the Violence Against Women Act, which Republicans in Congress have shamefully blocked. For the first time, the Democratic Party platform speaks specifically to the needs of urban Indians. And I'm so pleased that the platform commits to supporting national curricula to teach Native American history and culture in our nation's schools, because Native history is American history. Our platform also includes language combating hurtful and racist stereotypes of Native Americans in mainstream American culture. And at last, I am pleased this platform has the most progressive and important language on racial justice, criminal justice reform, disability, women, and LGBTQ rights in our party's platform history. And Mayor Bottoms, I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd like to acknowledge Senator Duckworth, who also has comments on this section.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 1 in 4 Americans lives with a disability. I'm pleased to see that not only does this platform contain an extremely strong section on protecting disability rights, but the concerns of Americans with disabilities are woven throughout the platform, including in employment, housing, education, and healthcare. This platform unequivocally commits to the Americans with Disabilities Act and to opposing any efforts to weaken its enforcement. It contains strong language about strengthening the SSI and SSDI programs and making them easier for people with disabilities to access the benefits that they deserve. I'm also pleased to see the strong language in this platform around protecting women's rights and LGBTQ+ rights. The Trump administration has taken every opportunity to try to undermine rights and protections for women, people with disabilities, and LGBTQ+ Americans. I also want to comment on the inclusion of a section on supporting the freedom of the press. This was not a section that Democrats felt was necessary to include in the 2016 platform, because we did not imagine a scenario in which the President of the United States would regularly attack and target the press as the enemy of the people, I quote, or that the President would fail to take any meaningful action after a United States ally, Saudi Arabia, brazenly killed a Washington Post journalist. The last 4 years have made it clear that we cannot take these rights for granted. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. I would like to recognize Congresswoman Lee. Okay, all right. Nice to see you, Congresswoman.
Good to see you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Juggling today, but thank you, Madam Chair, so much for your leadership. I hope all is well. And just so good to see you. And I want to thank Andy Grossman, Leah Moody, and your team for such phenomenal work, especially given this era of COVID and remote meetings. I'm particularly pleased about the unity of this effort and how we've come together to lift up our shared values through the policy statements in this document. Of course, in the moment especially, I'm proud of the strong racial, economic justice, and equity provisions we've been included in all corners and throughout this document. Let me just highlight a few of the important provisions that our platform relates to justice. First, as it relates to achieving racial justice and equity, historic wrongs and abuses perpetrated against Native Americans, 2.5 centuries of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow segregation, and a history of exclusionary immigration policies have created profound and lasting inequities in income, wealth, education, employment, housing, environmental quality, health care for communities of color. Democrats are committed to standing up to racism and bigotry in our laws, in our culture, in our politics, in our society, and we recognize that race-neutral policies are not sufficient to rectify race-based disparities. We will take a comprehensive approach to embed racial justice in every element of our government agenda, including in jobs and job creation, workforce, economic development, small business and entrepreneurship, eliminating poverty and closing the racial wealth gap, promoting asset building and home ownership, education, healthcare, criminal justice reform, environmental justice, and voting rights. We believe, yes, that Black Lives Matter and will establish the National Commission to examine the lasting economic effects of slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and racially discriminatory federal policies on income, wealth, educational, health, and employment outcomes to pursue truth and promote racial healing and to study reparations. We must acknowledge that there can be no realization of the American dream without grappling with the lasting effects of slavery and facing up to the centuries-long campaign of violence, fear, and trauma wrought upon Black Americans. Also, we remain committed to ending poverty and enabling all Americans to live up to their God-given potential. We recognize that the official poverty rate as measured and communicated by the federal government fails to capture critical needs like housing, education, healthcare, transportation, energy, and other necessities, and therefore understates the true share of Americans living in poverty. We support the 10-20-30 funding approach to direct at least 10% of federal funding to communities where 20% or more of the population has been living below the poverty line for 30 years. We significantly expand affordable housing. In the wealthiest country in the world, it's a moral obligation that any child should go to bed hungry, and Democrats will increase funding for food assistance programs, including SNAP, WIC, and school meals. And we also intend to remove barriers that keep formerly incarcerated individuals from accessing food assistance. Thank you again, Madam Chair. This is a great unity platform, and I'm proud to support it.
Thank you. Our next section focuses on immigration and how Democrats will work to develop a humane 21st century immigration system that benefits all Americans. We know that our greatest strength is our diversity and compassion. Democrats will work to reverse the damage caused by the Trump administration and will build an immigration system that embodies our values, expands economic opportunities for all Americans, and enhances our global competitiveness. I will now turn it over to Carmel Martin, who will provide additional details on this section.
Thank you, Mayor Bottoms. This is another section that was greatly enhanced by our process through the Immigration Unity Task Force, as well as input from many of the drafting committee members and external advocates who we spoke with. The idea that out of many we are one is a bedrock American ideal that has animated our country from its earliest days, inspiring people from every corner of the earth to participate in our democratic experiment. These are values that I know are shared not just across the Democratic Party, but across the majority of Americans. The Trump administration has repudiated that idea and abandoned our values as diverse, compassionate, and welcoming. In this section, we highlight not only how we intend to right the wrong of the Trump administration's callous, cruel, and reckless immigration policy, but also how we will build a 21st century immigration system that provides a roadmap to citizenship, prioritizes family reunification, helps grow and enhance our economy, safeguards our security, and restores our cherished values. Yesterday, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, President Trump attempted once again to use immigrants as a political cudgel while speaking in the Rose Garden. He blatantly misrepresented the conclusions of the Unity Task Force on Immigration, whose recommendations are reflected here. Democrats are committed to establishing an immigration platform that expands economic opportunities for all Americans, enhances our global competitiveness, and embodies our most cherished American values. And as the daughter of immigrants, I'm very proud to have played a part in its development.
Thank you, Carmel. I'd like to acknowledge Congresswoman Garcia.
Thank you, Mayor. And I too want to thank the Unity Task Force for doing such a great job of building this part of the platform. There's no question that this administration has done nothing but tear families apart and has had a program of, just cruel and inhumane policies with regarding to immigration. Our platform commits to righting the wrongs of the Trump administration. We will rescind the president's made-up national emergency and put an end to his unnecessary, wasteful, and ineffective wall on the southern border. We will terminate his discriminatory travel and immigration bans and reinstate, expand, and streamline protections for dreamers. The platform also recognizes that our immigration system was broken long before President Trump came into office, and his departure alone won't fix it all. We have much work to do. That's why I'm pleased to see a clear roadmap to citizenship for the millions of undocumented workers, caregivers, students, soldiers, and children who are an essential part of our economy and the fabric of this nation, and a commitment to make our immigration processes faster, more efficient, and less costly, and a clear commitment to family unity, a unity with compassion as a guiding principle for our immigration policy. Madam Chair, this is a great platform that I think all of us can embrace because, as been said, we must work hard to maintain our core principles and values as a country. Being welcoming and honoring our stranger and respecting people as the children of God that we are is the bottom line on this one. So I urge adoption of this a section of the platform. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd like to acknowledge President Applebaum.
Thank you, Mayor. Democrats know that when employers feel free to abuse and bully immigrant workers, all workers suffer. That's why I'm pleased to see a clear commitment in the platform to hold employers accountable, promote workers' rights, and prioritize the enforcement of labor and employment laws across the economy, including discrimination and sexual harassment protections, wage and hour laws, and health and safety rules. Like all of you, I believe the United States should be a beacon of hope for those who are suffering violence and injustice. And that is why I am proud of our party's commitment to protect and expand the existing asylum system and other humanitarian protections, and commit to expanding refugee resettlement. It's not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Bringing in those seeking a better life helps preserve the stability of America's partners abroad, strengthens our hand in getting other countries to uphold their obligations, grows our own economy, and enriches our society. Thank you.
Nice job.
Thank you, President Applebaum. We will now discuss the section entitled Restoring and Strengthening Our Democracy. This section highlights the values that we share as Democrats to restore and protect the right to vote and our commitment to aggressively pushing back on voter suppression efforts at every level. We also know that our government and elections should reflect the interests of the American people and not corporations. Democrats are committed to improving transparency across the government in order to rebuild trust with the American people. I will now turn it over to Carmel Martin, who will provide additional details.
Thank you, Mayor Bottoms. Restoring and strengthening our democracy is one of the most urgent tasks that we face. This section of the platform lays out how we intend to ensure that our government and our elections reflect the interests of the American people. That includes protecting and enforcing voting rights and stamping out voter suppression in all its forms, reforming the broken campaign finance system, building an effective, ethical, and transparent government, and strengthening a public U.S. Postal Service. We also urgently call to make Washington, D.C., my home, the 51st state, because it's past time to stop treating its more than 700,000 residents as second-class citizens. And we believe in guaranteeing self-determination for Puerto Rico and supporting self-government and self-determination for the people of the U.S. territories. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Carmel. I'd like to acknowledge State Senator Rodriguez.
Mayor Bottoms, thank you. Our government and our elections are supposed to reflect the interests of the American people, not just the wealthy few and biggest corporations. Republican governors, legislatures, and state officials have disenfranchised voters, particularly people of color, young people, low-income people, and people with disabilities. And as Democrats, we must and we will fight to protect Americans' fundamental right to vote. I applaud the language in this section that calls for restoring the Voting Rights Act and making voting easier and more accessible through automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration, early voting, and universal vote from home and vote by mail options. I'm also glad to see that this platform strongly supports self-determination for the people of Puerto Rico and advocate for an end to the unequal treatment of the people of Puerto Rico. The Trump administration's catastrophic response to Hurricane Maria created unimaginable suffering on the island, adding a man-made disaster on top of a natural disaster. Puerto Rico continues to need and deserve more support and investment to build a thriving economy. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Orton for comments on this section.
Thanks, Mayor. I want to strongly speak in favor of two areas of the platform language here. The first on campaign finance. It seems like a century ago, but at one time there was actually a bipartisan discussion about how to get the corrupting influence of money out of our political system. My former Senator Russ Feingold worked with the late Senator John McCain to pass a total ban on soft money to the political parties, money that was found by the Supreme Court to have a demonstrably corrupting effect on Congress. President George W. Bush signed the McCain-Feingold bill. It began to work, as we saw from President Obama's campaigns, that small dollar contributions worked and could fund presidential campaigns, a system that brought millions of working people into the political process. But as we've seen, Wall Street, corporate lobbyists, billionaire donors fought tooth and nail to rebuild their influence in politics, a mission that culminated successfully and unfortunately in the lawless and corrupt Citizens United decision. And since Citizens United, and beyond that, the Republican Party in turn, after Citizens United, caved to its right flank and put its party's interests ahead of the country's. For decades, we saw that corruption result in policies that enriched the ultra wealthy and left millions in poverty. Since Citizens United, we see again the destructive and often deadly cost of this corruption all the time. Gun manufacturers and the NRA called the shots on legislation that could end gun violence. Payday lenders can still charge astronomical interest rates that can only be described as usury. And sadly, we have a Federal Elections Commission that is hobbled not just by politics, but by its very design. Of course, the manifestation of this corruption is a walking and talking president who sees his own financial interests as inseparable from the country's. So I am very pleased that this platform has taken the strongest position on campaign finance and reform and corruption I've ever seen, calling for not just the repeal of Citizens United and the original Buckley v. Vallejo decision from the 70s that first gave legal force to the lie that money is speech, but calling for a total end to private financing in elections. We must return the power of our democracy to the people. And as Senator Bernie Sanders would say, change never happens from the top down. It only happens from the bottom up. I also strongly support provisions calling for DC to be our 51st state. Disenfranchisement takes many forms, and some are subtle, but denying DC the right to statehood and voting congressional representation is among the most blunt and unjust. Thank you so much, and back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Orton. I'd like to acknowledge Congresswoman Garcia.
Thank you, Mayor. Democrats, some of you may recall, this past January, I had the honor and the solemn duty to serve as one of the impeachment managers tasked with making the case for the removal of Donald Trump as President of the United States. It was an experience that cemented in me the critical need for effective safeguards to protect our democracy and ensure transparency. In this section, Democrats recommit themselves to this goal, starting by requiring all candidates, let me repeat that, all candidates for federal office to publicly disclose their tax returns. Never again can we allow a president to so brazenly abuse the powers of the office, betray our national interests, and corrupt our elections for their own personal gain. Democrats will build an effective, transparent, and above all, ethical federal government that the American people can trust. We will strengthen whistleblower protections and re-empower independent inspectors general. We'll require all candidates for federal office, all federal offices, including, of course, the presidential candidate, to publicly disclose at least 10 years of tax returns. And we will ban lobbying by foreign governments and never, ever allow a foreign government to interfere in our elections. In our platform, we are making it clear that nadie está por encima de la ley. No one is above the law. We're making this very clear because democracy is the gift each generation gives to the next. And Democrats are committed to ensuring our children inherit just that. Thank you, Mayor, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Now on to climate change, which is an existential crisis that has global impact. There's no greater challenge facing our nation. Democrats believe that we enact policies that address the climate crisis while building a clean energy economy that puts workers and communities first and addresses issues of environmental justice. I will now turn it over to Carmel Martin, who will provide additional information on this section.
Thank you, Mayor Bottoms. While thousands of Americans have died from record-breaking storms, devastating wildfires, and historic floods, President Trump continues to callously and willfully deny the science and sabotage efforts at home and around the world to combat the climate crisis while we still can. Yesterday in the Rose Garden, President Trump tried once again to distract from his complete and utter failure to contain the COVID-19 pandemic and protect American lives and jobs by criticizing and misrepresenting Democrats' commitment to combating climate change. Our platform lays out our plan to reverse the Trump administration's dangerous and destructive rollbacks of critical climate and environmental protections and build a thriving, equitable, and globally competitive clean energy economy that puts workers and communities first and leaves no one behind. Our platform also applauds the organizing efforts of young people, union workers, and communities of color to mobilize voters and make the climate crisis a top priority. As Democrats, we believe the scientists. The window for unprecedented and necessary action is closing and closing fast. Democrats reject the false choice between growing our economy and combating climate change. We can and must do both at the same time. Back to you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Carmel. I'd like to recognize Secretary Vilsack.
Thanks, Mayor. Appreciate the opportunity to speak about this issue. I think it's time for America to get serious about an urgent crisis and the global emergency that climate change represents. And I believe this platform indicates that the Democratic Party is prepared to lead our country in an aggressive and progressive effort to do so. I'm really pleased to see this platform in setting out strong, ambitious targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the economy. but not only pointing out the challenge, but also looking at the opportunity to invest that this represents. Investments in clean energy, clean manufacturing, clean buildings, clean transportation, research, development, and agriculture, all of which will create good paying jobs for Americans while also addressing this urgent crisis and global emergency. It is clear that the United States needs to also take back its position of international leadership on this particular issue. And to do so, we need to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement on day one, and this platform calls for that. I am particularly pleased and happy to see the Democratic Party address specifically the opportunity that American agriculture has to make a significant commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This platform calls for American agriculture to be the first in the world and to lead agriculture globally to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. This is going to spark a complete revolution and change in agriculture towards a more sustainable production process, and will also, importantly, open up new opportunities for revenue for our farmers. Our farmers, our ranchers, and our forest landowners, they know all too well the challenges of climate change. They deal with it every single day, and they are eager to be part of the solution, and this agenda will help them do that. And it's incredibly important for our party to send a strong and clear message to rural America that they will be a significant factor in addressing climate change. I'm glad to see that also built into our platform is a nod and notion of the importance of building resilience to climate change. I know from our situation here in the Midwest that we've seen devastating floods. I'm also aware of the fact that our coastal communities are grappling with sea level rise and stronger and more intense storms. And every fire season, which I used to deal with as a former Secretary of Agriculture, our U.S. Forest Service, I know that every fire season appears to get worse in the western part of the U.S. These extreme weather events cost our economy billions of dollars. They devastate our community, and they threaten the very security of our people. Even as we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we need to do more to protect Americans' lives and livelihoods from the impacts of climate change. And Democrats are going to propose a platform which addresses this in a very significant and meaningful way. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge Congresswoman Holland.
Thank you so much, Mayor Bottoms. It's impossible to talk responsibly about the climate crisis in America without also speaking about the dire need for environmental justice. People of color, including Indigenous communities, have disproportionately suffered from air pollution, water pollution, and exposure to toxic sites. Whether it's pollution at Cancer Alley in St. James Parish in Louisiana, disproportionately affecting our Black community, immigrants and low-income residents in Miami's Little Haiti being displaced because of sea level rise due to climate change, Blacks and Hispanics suffering from the highest level of air pollution in the country in Detroit, or in my home state of New Mexico, where the Navajo Nation and Hispanic communities suffer under the largest methane cloud in the world. Democrats know we have to tackle environmental justice. This platform argues for the creation of an environmental justice fund to make an historic investment aimed at eliminating the legacy of pollution in minority communities. I firmly believe this fund, alongside the steps highlighted in this section, will move us boldly into a more equitable and healthful future. I'm also glad to see a strong commitment to conservation, including restoring the full extent of the national monuments at Bears Ears, Grand Staircase Escalante, and the Northeast Canyons and seamounts that were illegally reduced by the Trump administration. The platform supports protecting the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is sacred to Alaska Natives, sets an ambitious goal of conserving 30% of our lands and waters by 2030, and thereby ensuring that our nation's public lands and national parks tell the full story of our diverse America for our grandchildren. And Mayor Bottoms, I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd like to acknowledge President Trumka.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. President, are you unmuted?
Thank you. It is a major step forward that this platform puts workers front and center in addressing the climate crisis. These changes are difficult for workers and the timelines are challenging. But for the first time, we're offering a technology neutral path to emissions reductions tied to a better deal for working families. See, we can rebuild our economy from the COVID-19 pandemic and President Trump's recession by making historic public and private investments in clean energy, manufacturing, transportation, housing and buildings, and research and development. I'm pleased the platform says all jobs in the clean energy economy should provide the opportunity to join a union, and that all clean energy projects financed with federal support, including through the tax code, should come with robust wage provisions and labor and civil rights requirements. Building a 21st century electric grid, reducing methane pollution, making energy efficient upgrades in 2 million homes and 4 million buildings, and charting a path for the deployment of new technologies will create jobs. And the provisions in this platform will make sure they are well-paid union jobs. I'm also glad to see a strong commitment in this platform to building a clean, equitable, and globally competitive manufacturing sector, including through Buy Clean and Buy American standards. And finally, I commend this platform's language about protecting retirees' health and pension benefits and shoring up the Black Lung Disability Trust Fund. It's shameful that President Trump and the Republicans have turned their backs on America's coal miners and retirees. And we owe those communities the retirement security they earned through decades of hard work. Democrats will honor those commitments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, President Trumka. Our next section focuses on our commitment to provide a world-class education in every zip code. Every child, no matter their circumstances, deserves access to quality education. Democrats believe in universal early childhood education and affordable, high-quality childcare. We will shut down the school to prison pipeline and build a school to opportunity pipeline in its place. We will make college affordable again and give Americans relief from crushing student debt. I will now turn it over to Carmel Martin, who will provide additional details on this section.
Thank you, Mayor Bottoms. Education is the key to addressing the challenges before us, to growing our economy, maintaining American competitiveness, and building a more just, equitable, civically engaged, and socially conscientious nation. As Democrats, we believe that education is a critical public good, not a commodity. We believe it is the government's responsibility to ensure that every child everywhere is able to receive a world-class education that enables them to lead meaningful lives, no matter their race, zip code, disability status, sexual orientation, gender identity, or household income. Our platform lays out plans to guarantee universal early childhood education, high-quality K-12 schools across America, and affordable and accessible higher education that ends the crushing student debt burden. I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Carmel. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Gottney.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'd like to recognize my colleagues who served on the Education Unity Task Force and who played a major role in the development of this platform. I'd also like to thank Carmel and Lilia for their help. And of course, thanks to Vice President Biden and Senator Sanders for undertaking what was really an historic process. This education platform is guided by Democrats' shared sense of responsibility to ensuring the well-being of every child in America and achieving an egalitarian education system in society. It affirms our commitment to universal high-quality education and recognizes the vital role that government must play in making that happen. As stated in this platform, Democrats support universal high quality pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds. We will close the appalling gap in public school funding between predominantly white school districts and those that serve students of color by tripling Title I funding. We will fully fund the IDEA so that students with disabilities and their teachers get the support they need. And we will invest in community schools that provide wraparound services to students and their families. We will also safeguard our public education system from those who seek to transform it into a profitable industry. Regarding higher education, Democrats believe that everyone should be able to earn a college degree if they choose to, without money standing in the way. That is why we will make public colleges and universities tuition free for students whose families earn less than $125,000 a year, which is roughly 80% of all Americans. And it is why we will make community colleges tuition free for all students, including Dreamers. We will also create new federal funding streams, a Title I for higher education, if you will, for public colleges and universities, HBCUs, MSIs, and TCUs that enroll and graduate low-income students. Finally, we will provide students relief from student debt, both immediately during the COVID-19 pandemic, and over the long term. No longer will young people be priced out of college or saddled with crushing student debt. I know that this is not going to be easy to achieve everything in this very ambitious document, but I believe that our unity and the unity that we established during the task force process and in the drafting is a really excellent first step. Thank you.
All right, I know that Congresswoman Lee may be in committee meetings, so if we can go to Dr. Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did want to take a moment to talk about HBCUs, MSIs, and community colleges as they are listed in the platform document. I'm quite pleased with their support in the document. I want to make sure I give a personal experience from Delaware State University. HBCUs, MSIs, and community colleges are some of the most important institutions in the country. I don't choose those words lightly. Few institutions specialize in providing access to a comprehensive education to students who too often lack every advantage except sheer determination to do better for themselves and their families. I offer one case in point from Delaware State University, the most substantively diverse, contemporary, unapologetically Black college and university in the country. Last year, a shy young student came to my office after having heard about me through a mentor at his Boys and Girls Club. He was terrified to admit it, but he was homeless. He had persisted at the university for 2 years by sleeping in cars and on his friends' couches. He told no one, but kept moving around from one semester to another. That night, he had nothing to eat and no place to sleep. We immediately found him a place to live, the resources to continue his education, and a job in my office. Last May, he graduated and will start his teaching career in Baltimore City schools this fall. He will change someone else's life because an HBCU believed in and invested in his. Providing low-cost, high-quality education to not only the best and brightest, but especially for those who are locked out or underserved, is not just our history, it's who we are. Our doors have always and will continue to be open to any student, regardless of where they come from, what they look like, who they love, or how much money their family makes. I've often been asked if HBCUs remain relevant in today's America. My answer never changes. So few universities can do what we do. If we didn't exist, the nation would have to invent us. This is our proud legacy, one that deserves ongoing support from our party and ultimately our highest office in the land. I'm pleased that the platform has called out HBCUs, MSIs, and community colleges specifically. We must continue to invest in them as they continue to invest in our future. Madam Chair, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. I'd like to offer an amen to that as a proud graduate of a HBCU, Florida A&M University. which I was able to get through debt-free with a combination of Pell Grants, scholarships, and a student work job at our local college radio station. So I proudly carry the banners of HBCUs, and I personally know how important it has been for me, but so many people like me across our country. So thank you for your leadership there.
We have a lot of fans at Delaware State University, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I know, I think I saw Congresswoman Lee come back in. I'm not sure if she would still like to offer remarks on this section. I know Congresswoman Lee and Congresswoman Clark are both in the middle of committee meetings and voting. Congresswoman Lee, do you have any comments? Are you there? Would you like to offer any comments, or should we move on to the next section?
Hi, Mayor Bottoms, are you calling me?
Yes, I am. I don't want to put you on the spot, though.
Okay.
All right. So we'll keep moving.
Okay. No, I'm good. Can I speak for a minute or so?
Yes, of course. Go right ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll start. It's hard to hear. But anyway, let me just highlight a couple of sections that I want to comment on where I think the drafting committee did a great job. One is just providing a world-class education in every zip code. You know, there's a lot of ground covered in this section, but one section that I want to highlight is our commitment to increasing investments in high-quality science, technology, engineering, and math programs in our public schools, and prioritizing STEAM education and funding for underrepresented students, including students of color, girls, and low-income students, to help and reduce enrollment and achievement gaps. And as you may remember, President Obama began the Computer Science for All initiative. And so this builds on that. And I'm really pleased that the party still sees the need and the necessity to make sure we include this as one of our principles. Also, with regard to the authorization to use military force, you know, I opposed the 2001 AUMF, and I'm pleased to see that our party platform calls for its repeal. Ending our forever wars can and must be a priority, as this document acknowledged. So thank you again for all of the work that went into the document. I really appreciate your patience and understanding, given the 3 or 4 jobs that members of Congress are doing right now. But we just want to say to you how important it is that this committee and this unity platform move forward, and I fully support it. And thank you again.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We know that you all are doing some important work, so we certainly understand. Thank you. Our final section, Renewing American Leadership, addresses our party's belief that the United States should provide leadership on the world stage so that we can work with our allies to address the challenges that we face. Instead, we have a president whose failed policies have surrendered our place of global leadership. Joe Biden will restore dignified leadership at home and respected leadership on the world stage, as our policies at home and abroad are deeply connected. I will now turn it over to Carmel Martin, who will provide additional details on this section.
Thank you, Mayor Bottoms. As you said, President Trump promised that he would put America first, but under his leadership, his reputation and influence are in tatters. He's making our country less safe, our economy more fragile, and our democracy, values, and unity are endangered. Closing the chapter on America First is just the beginning of the work ahead. We cannot simply aspire to restore American leadership. We must reinvent it for a new era. We must revitalize the power and purpose of American diplomacy, transform our armed services for the 21st century, mobilize the world to address threats that no country can solve on its own, and advance American interests and values in a rapidly changing global economy and international landscape. Most importantly, Democrats will ensure that the reinvention of American leadership abroad prioritizes and accelerates our renewal at home. We will root a disciplined foreign policy in the needs and aspirations of the American middle class and the imperative of building a more dynamic, fair, and resilient society, the ultimate wellspring of our power. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor Bottoms.
Thank you, Carmel. I'd like to acknowledge Ms. Smith, who has additional comments.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bottoms. This platform makes clear that the United States can only be strong abroad if it is strong and united at home. And conversely, it also stresses the importance of the United States being strong abroad so that we can make sure that we are strong at home. The bottom line here with this section of the platform is that this party will measure the effectiveness of US foreign policy priorities and its policies in a frame of whether and how it impacts everyday Americans. The platform covers a lot of important changes to the international environment, and I'll just tick through a few of those. It talks about this new competitive world that the United States finds itself in, with a rising China and a resurgent Russia, among many other actors that are seeking to undermine our interests. The platform stresses that the United States and really no country in the world can solve any of the challenges that we're facing regionally or functionally on our own. And therefore, it stresses the importance of the United States to work with its allies and partners around the world, and also the importance of America taking its seat at the head of the table once again, in cases where the safety and security of Americans are at stake. Lastly, the platform also talks about the change in the global environment by stressing the damage that President Trump has done to America's image in the world, the institutions of which we are a member, and our many relationships with our close partners and allies around the world. The platform also gets into kind of our toolkit, and there it talks first and foremost not only about restoring American leadership, but the importance of renewing American diplomacy. It talks about reinventing and reinvesting in our allied relationships, alliances, various international organizations, including organizations like the UN Human Rights Council, which we will rejoin, or the WHO, which we would return to as well. Essentially, what this does is it puts values at the center of American foreign policy and talks about how we will stand up for human rights and democracy. We are focused in this platform on ending the forever wars, securing our competitive edge by investing in new technology, and ensuring that climate change is a key part of the US foreign policy platform. To conclude, I would just say that this platform stresses our commitment to restore the example of our power, but also, as the Vice President has said many times, enhancing the power of our example. Thank you very much. I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. I'd like to acknowledge Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as we need to renew American diplomacy for a new era, we must also transform our armed forces for the 21st century. Our platform makes clear that Democrats believe our military is and must be the most effective fighting force in the world. And we lay out a smart and strategic approach to keeping it that way by bringing our forever wars to a responsible end, rationalizing our defense budget, investing in the forces and technologies of the future, repairing civil-military relations badly strained by this administration, and strengthening our covenant with service members, veterans, and military families. I'm proud to be a member of a party that understands that our armed forces are stronger when they reflect the richness and diversity of American society, when it provides world-class health care to US service members and veterans, when it helps heal the visible and invisible wounds of battle, and when it takes care of the young Americans who have borne that battle, supports their transition to civilian life, and takes care of military families who have been asked to endure so much for so long with far too little support. I'm very proud of this platform. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I will now entertain a motion to approve the draft platform as considered today and to authorize staff to make corrections which are consistent with our discussions. This
I so
document,
move.
So moved.
So moved.
all right. This document will be recommended for approval to the full platform committee when it meets on July 27th. Thank you all for eagerly making a motion to approve. Can we get an equally eager motion to
Second.
second?
Second.
Is there any additional discussion? All right, there being none, all in favor, please vote by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Thank you. The motion has passed. And thank you, whomever had the dog barking. That was right on cue. Thank you for that.
Right timing.
All right, back to Carmel for additional remarks.
Thank you so much, Mayor Bottoms. I just wanted to take a minute, I won't keep you all long, on behalf of the Vice President, to thank all the members of this drafting committee for their insightful recommendations and additions to this platform. We're privileged to have had the opportunity to engage with the members of the platform drafting committee for the last several weeks and to be able to reflect their input and terrific ideas from the very start in our first draft, and then got terrific ideas as the process moved forward. I feel honored to have been able to work with all of you, and particularly honored to be able to work under the leadership of Mayor Bottoms, given all that you have going on right now. I know we're all extremely grateful for your leadership. This platform represents a bold, progressive, unified vision for what our country will achieve under Vice President Biden's leadership. Now more than ever, we need experienced, compassionate, responsible leadership in the Oval Office to save American lives from the coronavirus pandemic and to save American jobs from President Trump's recession. It's been a profound honor to serve alongside the distinguished members of the Platform Drafting Committee, to be able to work with Senator Sanders' representatives, the terrific team at the DNC, and our platform leadership. I want to give a special shout out to our writing team led by Christina and Matan. When the world reads this platform, they'll see their incredible writing skills, but also intellect. But what they won't see is their incredible, gracious and patient personalities. But I know all the drafting committee members were able to see that and appreciate it as well. So thank you all for all you've done, and look forward to moving forward with the process to the full platform committee.
Thank you, Carmel, and to the entire team who has made this a seamless process, and to the committee. Thank you for all of your work. It's been an honor to be able to do this work alongside you and to follow in the footsteps of some very, very big shoes with Congressman Elijah Cummings. So I appreciate the work that you all have done. I know it's been an incredible amount of work, and this platform reflects that. We have now completed this committee's work on the 2020 Democratic Party platform. Thank you again to everyone for their participation. I think all of us around this table were humbled by the stories we heard, and appreciate the individuals who presented this committee with important issues to consider. Thank you to the platform team who have been to make sure that this has been a smooth and seamless process. I have no doubt that our party platform is going to clearly articulate the values of our great party and highlight Joe Biden's vision for our country. On July 27th, the full platform committee will meet virtually, and that meeting will be live streamed on the Democratic National Convention's YouTube channel. The full committee, chaired by Dennis McDonough and Julie Chavez Rodriguez, will adopt a platform that will be presented to the full convention body for consideration by all convention delegates. Repairing the damage that Donald Trump has done to this country will be the work of generations, but it begins with electing Joe Biden this fall and implementing what will be, without a doubt, the most progressive platform in our party's history. Progress is rarely easy, but together, I believe we can move our country forward and resign Donald Trump to the dustbin of history and elect Joe Biden as our president. Thank you again for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you all out on the campaign trail, even if it's only virtually. Thank you, and I pray that you and your families will remain safe and look forward to seeing you soon.